Police Minister and Ethnic Communities Minister Mark Mitchell has taken to social media over the weekend to condemn Destiny Church for their demonstration in Auckland over the long weekend, and well, I think he's out of touch. I don't think this thread that he's made on X is particularly popular amongst people who support the coalition. I think probably a few more of the liberal centrists who just generally don't like Destiny Church and Brian Tamaki may be a little bit more lenient on him for this, but I do know that the rough circles that I tend to mix with, the more conservative base, even the libertarian base, they're not particularly keen on this messaging. So what has he said? I'll go through the thread bit by bit, and we'll discuss it. Mark Mitchell begins, I was appalled at the footage of Destiny Church March over the weekend in which minority communities were targeted. Everyone in New Zealand has the right to freedom of speech and protest. That is not up for debate. That does mean, however, that New Zealanders are free to condemn behaviour that is not in keeping with our values as a country and as a wider community. I am proud to be the Minister of Ethnic Communities in a multicultural and diverse New Zealand, which has had a proud history of welcoming people from all walks of life. We all have a role to play to ensure New Zealand is a peaceful, inclusive country. Behaviour that incites discrimination or violence is damaging and reductive. I condemn the vile rhetoric and behaviour of the Destiny Church and its associates. The behaviour I saw was not Kiwi nor Christian. The use of taiaha, which is a culturally sacred weapon, to overtly stab at flags representing minority groups in our country while being torn to pieces and burnt is not acceptable. The government has a strong focus on public safety. Anything that threatens that or disturbs the public's right to go about their lives free from threat of violence is something I take very seriously. New Zealand welcomes all people of all backgrounds and ethnicities who are willing to behave in a way that is tolerant and reflective of our values. The actions I saw from Destiny Church this weekend, in my view, are not welcome in New Zealand. This is where Mark Mitchell goes wrong. The idea that we should be inclusive of others, but they don't need to be inclusive of us. That we should be inclusive of radical ideologies and dare I say it, cultures, but they don't have to have any regard for our actual values as a country, for our culture in this country. You know, the idea that gender ideologues can infect the minds of young people in this country, even adults, but young people in particular, with utter nonsense that encourages them to mutilate themselves, to hate themselves, and to try and become something which they simply can't become. And that they should be able to do that without any pushback, without us going to extreme lengths so that people like Mark Mitchell will get the message. I do find it interesting that he's Minister of Ethnic Communities commenting on this, because whilst I do believe it did delve into some matters of an ethnic nature, the primary minority groups targeted were the likes of the rainbow community, or in this case, the radical gender ideologue, cultural Marxist faction of New Zealand, which is about yay big and not very relevant, but doing far too much damage. And the problem is our institutions are ideologically captured. Our police force is ideologically captured. Our ministers are ideologically captured. Or they're too scared to do what's necessary, which is to say, hey look, encouraging people to mutilate themselves in the name of ideology is probably bad, so you should probably stop that. No, instead, the people protesting that are the bad guys. You're not allowed to acknowledge that gender ideology is a radical, destructive ideology which is only doing harm in this world. Only doing harm. You're also not allowed to acknowledge that those marching down the street with Palestinian flags don't love this country. They hate this country. In fact, they hate Western civilization and they want to defend literal terrorists. They are the same people who say that this country is not sovereign, that New Zealand is not a sovereign country, it's actually Aotearoa that's sovereign, that the Crown is not sovereign, that Māori are sovereign. These are the kinds of people that the likes of Destiny Church push back against, but you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to acknowledge that what was once seditious is ANZI New Zealand. You're not allowed to. You're not allowed to acknowledge that these people are traitors to this country, that these people hate this country, that these people hate everything that we stand for. No. You need to be inclusive of what they believe and their culture, their values, and you have to do so by rejecting your own. And if they push back against yours, that's fair game, because you're in the supposed majority. You are in this case, you are the privileged person because this is your country. You're automatically privileged, especially if you're white. And so if they push back on you, that's fine. You just have to suck it up. But if you push back on them, you are the bad guy. You need to be condemned by our literal Minister of the Crown. And you probably warrant a visit from the police as well. I know that all too well. This is the country that we live in now. I want to touch on one specific sentence that Mark Mitchell said, and he says, behaviour that incites discrimination or violence is damaging and reductive. Where was that energy when women were getting bashed in Albert Park? I understand you weren't Minister of Police then, or Minister of Ethnic Communities, or Minister of anything at that point in time. But where was that energy? You know, that's what the trans rights activists do regularly. If people get in their way, they will result in violence. They're inherently discriminatory. They don't even view women as women. They will tell you to your face that if you're a white cis man, your opinion is invalid, or that you are a colonizer, you are a misogynist, and that your opinion doesn't matter, that you don't matter. I think that's rather discriminatory, don't you think? Just singling people out for how they look, what they are, and deciding that they are somehow lesser than, that their opinion is not valid. You see, for me, I think the opinions of trans rights activists are valid, as in they're allowed to have them and I will acknowledge them, but I will also acknowledge that they are batshit crazy, that they don't live in the real world. I think that's more than fair. I have no issue with trans rights activists marching down the street. You know, they'll get tired very, very quickly because they're not getting enough protein. They're not getting enough energy. But, you know, they're allowed to march down the street and make a fool of themselves. Because at the end of the day, every single time the trans rights activists march down the street, they are saying, please allow us to mutilate our own bodies. Please allow us to mutilate the bodies of children. Please allow us to destroy the lives of these innocent young people before they've even begun. That's what they say every single time they march down the street. And whilst that should be great, everyone can see just how delusional these people are. The problem is, if you openly acknowledge what they actually are, how delusional they actually are, you're at risk of ostracization from society, from your workplace and whatever. You're at risk of visits from the police. And ultimately, you are painted as the bad guy for acknowledging just how delusional these people are. And it's the same any single time the far left has a view. If the far left holds a view, if the far left has a march, and you oppose that view, you oppose that protest, you are the bad guy. No matter how rational, no matter how based in fact your position is. You are the bad guy, because the far left has a monopoly on truth, because truth does not exist.